Toxic family, setting boundaries without guilt. There comes a moment in life when you stop pretending that everything is fine. A moment when the weight you have carried for years begins to press against your chest with a force you can no longer ignore. It usually happens in silence. In a room you have known your entire life, in a conversation that repeats itself like an old ritual you never chose. A familiar voice says something that stings, something that reduces you to the child you once were, and suddenly you realize that your peace has never belonged to you inside those walls. What was supposed to be a place of safety became a place of emotional debt, invisible expectations, and unspoken rules. And in that moment, you feel it, the quiet revolt rising from within. You begin to understand that something needs to change. Not because you want to cut ties or punish anyone, but because you finally see the cost of sacrificing yourself to maintain a harmony that never truly existed. As Marcus Aurelius would say, the world outside cannot harm your inner life unless you allow it. Yet many people grew up believing their inner life belonged to their family. Their reactions, their choices, even their silence became conditioned responses to old patterns, to roles assigned in childhood that no longer fit the person they have become. You try to be patient, you try to stay compassionate, you try to be the understanding one, hoping that love will eventually outweigh dysfunction. But every time you bend to keep the peace, you feel something inside you shrinking. A voice telling you that this kind of loyalty is slowly draining your identity. The truth no one wants to admit is that some families use guilt as a chain, not as a moral compass. Some families defend their dysfunction because changing it would require confronting their own wounds, and so the cycle repeats itself. The child grows into an adult, but keeps playing the same part in the same story because no one ever taught them they had the right to rewrite the script. That is where boundaries enter, not as a wall, but as a declaration of self-respect. The moment you set a boundary, you are saying, my peace is not negotiable. My worth is not determined by my compliance. My silence is no longer for sale. And yet, the moment you take that step, guilt appears. Guilt whispers that you are being selfish, ungrateful, or disrespectful. But guilt is not always a sign of wrongdoing. Sometimes guilt is simply the echo of an old identity fighting for survival. You are not betraying anyone by protecting yourself. You are not abandoning your family by choosing emotional clarity. You are stepping into the life that was always meant for you. A life where love is not measured by how much you tolerate, but by how honestly you live. If you stay with me until the end of this journey, you will understand exactly why you feel guilty, how to break these invisible contracts, and how to build boundaries that honor your truth without hostility or fear. And once you see it clearly, you will never carry the same weight again. The moment you realize something is wrong, there is a specific moment when everything inside you shifts, even if the world around you stays the same. It rarely arrives with noise. It rarely comes with confrontation. It almost always comes quietly, like a simple thought that refuses to disappear. You're sitting across from someone you've known your entire life. They say something familiar, something you have heard for years, but this time it lands differently. It doesn't slide off your back the way it used to. It strikes you. It lingers. It makes you question why you have tolerated the same pattern for so long. This is the moment when the survival mechanisms of your childhood begin to collide with the awareness of your adulthood, creating a tension so powerful that you can no longer pretend the imbalance is normal. You see the dynamic clearly for the first time. You see the way your voice goes quiet when theirs gets louder. You notice how your shoulders tense before you even walk into the room. You notice how every conversation pulls you back into a role you don't recognize anymore, a version of yourself that exists only to maintain their comfort. And as you sit in that space, something inside you asks, Why am I still doing this? Why does this dynamic, built so long ago, still define the way I show up today? The truth is that many people grow up believing the family environment they experience is universal. They normalize the chaos, the emotional manipulation, the guilt, the subtle disrespect. They interpret their exhaustion as a personal flaw rather than a sign that something external is draining them. What makes this moment unforgettable is not the event itself, but the clarity that follows. You realize that every time you've walked away feeling heavy, it wasn't because you were dramatic. It wasn't because you were sensitive. It was because your body understood the truth long before your mind allowed you to acknowledge it. Stoic philosophy teaches that the mind must be trained to perceive reality without distortion. And when you finally see your family dynamic without sentimental filters, you recognize how much of your identity has been shaped by expectations that were never yours. You begin to question the unwritten rules you've lived under. The rule that says you must always agree. The rule that says you cannot challenge anything. The rule that says love means endurance, even when endurance is destroying your well-being. In this moment of awakening, guilt tries to pull you back. It whispers that questioning your family is betrayal, but questioning is not rejection. Awareness is not disrespect. Seeing the truth is not ingratitude, it is maturity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that people act according to their own limitations, and understanding this truth allows you to see your family's behavior without collapsing under it. Their patterns did not begin with you. Their wounds were not created by you. Their reactions are reflections of their internal world, not judgments of your worth. What you are feeling now is the beginning of self-respect, a boundary taking shape before you even speak it out loud. It starts with recognizing that your peace is not a luxury, but a necessity. It starts with acknowledging that love does not require you to shrink to be accepted. It starts with realizing that the role you played as a child is not the role you must play as an adult. You have permission to evolve beyond the script you inherited. You have permission to step out of the emotional narrative that keeps you small. And once this moment arrives, once you see the pattern clearly, you cannot unsee it. The tension between who you were forced to be and who you truly are becomes too great to ignore. You begin to feel the pull toward a different way of living, one built on intention instead of obligation, on clarity instead of emotional debt. This is the beginning of your inner liberation, not through rebellion, not through confrontation, but through the simple, powerful act of recognizing that something inside you has awakened. And now, you must decide what you will do with this awareness, because it is the foundation upon which every boundary you set will stand. The hidden truth: your family is not your fate. There comes a point when you begin to understand that the bond you were born into is not the same as the life you are allowed to build. For years, the idea of family was presented to you as something absolute, unchangeable, sacred in every form, no matter the cost. You were taught that blood meant obligation, that loyalty meant self-sacrifice, and that keeping the family together was more important than keeping yourself intact. But as your awareness grows, something becomes clear. The people who raised you shaped your beginning, but they do not have the right to dictate your future. And this truth, once understood deeply, becomes a doorway out of emotional captivity. You start to see how much of your behavior was molded by a system that benefited from your silence. You were encouraged to be accommodating. You were praised for being the one who never caused problems. You were told to forgive quickly, let things go, not take things personally, even when the things said to you were meant to wound, belittle, or control. The very traits that kept the peace in your childhood begin to suffocate you in adulthood. But you still hesitate to challenge anything because the guilt attached to the idea of change feels heavier than the discomfort you endure. This is where the Stoic lens becomes essential. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nothing belongs to you except your mind and your choices. Family may influence your emotional history, but they do not own your identity. When you start viewing your family dynamic from this perspective, you understand that the emotional debts you carry were never yours to begin with. The obligation to fix their wounds, the responsibility to carry their expectations, the pressure to behave a certain way to avoid conflict. These are not moral duties. These are inherited roles shaped by people who never questioned their own conditioning. You begin to recognize that every family operates with its own unspoken mythology. In some families, the myth is that unity must be preserved at all costs. In others, the myth is that expressing discomfort is betrayal. In many, the myth is that the oldest child must be responsible, the middle child must mediate, the youngest must stay small. These myths are not truths. They are coping mechanisms passed from one generation to the next, often unconsciously. And when you stop playing the part assigned to you, the entire system reacts, not because you're wrong, but because your change exposes their stagnation. Understanding that your family is not your fate is not an act of rebellion. It's an act of clarity. It's the realization that you are not morally bound to repeat the emotional patterns you witnessed growing up. You are not required to continue cycles of silence, submission, or self-abandonment just because they are familiar. You are allowed to break the patterns that broke you. You are allowed to create a new internal order, one built on intention rather than survival. This is not disrespect. This is evolution. When you begin to detach emotionally from old narratives, you start to see your relatives not as untouchable figures, but as human beings shaped by their own fears, insecurities, and unresolved traumas. This perspective doesn't justify harmful behavior, but it removes the illusion that their dysfunction defines your identity. You start to understand that your worth was never tied to their approval. Your life was never meant to be lived according to their fears. Your choices do not need to align with their expectations. You can love them and still outgrow the environment that shaped you. This is often the moment when resistance appears. Someone may call you distant. Someone may accuse you of changing too much. Someone may try to pull you back into the familiar structure because your independence threatens the emotional balance they rely on. But this resistance is not a sign to stop. It is a sign that you are finally stepping into your own life. The discomfort of change is far lighter than the misery of staying trapped in a role that shrinks you. As you accept that your family is not your fate, something powerful happens inside you. The guilt that once felt overwhelming begins to loosen its grip. You realize that choosing yourself is not abandonment. It is alignment. It is integrity. It is the highest form of respect for your own existence. And once you understand that your path is yours alone, you begin to walk it with a calmness that cannot be shaken by old expectations. The invisible contracts you never agreed to. At some point in your journey of awareness, you begin to recognize something unsettling. Much of the tension, guilt, and emotional exhaustion you feel around your family comes from rules you never consciously accepted. These rules weren't written, weren't discussed, and weren't negotiated. They were absorbed. They were embedded in the fabric of your daily life before you even understood what boundaries were. And as you look back with a clearer mind, you begin to identify the invisible contracts that have shaped the way you move, respond, and even think within your family environment. You realize that one of the unspoken contracts was the expectation that you would always be available, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and energetically. Whenever someone needed reassurance, you were expected to provide it. Whenever someone exploded, you were expected to absorb it. Whenever someone acted unfairly, you were expected to stay calm to avoid conflict. You were not asked, you were conditioned. The contract was simple. Your peace is less important than maintaining the emotional equilibrium of the household. Another invisible contract is the idea that their feelings always matter more than yours. If you were hurt, you were told you were exaggerating. If you tried to express discomfort, you were dismissed or mocked. If you set even the smallest boundary, you are accused of being disrespectful. Over time, this trains you to suppress your own emotions to protect the comfort of others. And the tragic part is that many people carry this pattern into adulthood without realizing they are still living under the same quiet agreement that kept them silent as children. You begin to see how the contract of unquestioned loyalty was forged. Loyalty in healthy relationships is mutual and respectful. But in toxic family dynamics, loyalty is often demanded, not earned. It is used as a shield to avoid accountability. You are expected to be loyal to the family image, even when the reality behind that image was painful or unhealthy. You were expected to keep secrets, tolerate mistreatment, or maintain harmony no matter how much it cost your mental health. The contract said, stay loyal, even if it breaks you. Stoic wisdom helps you see these contracts through a different lens. Marcus Aurelius taught that we must question the impressions that govern us. When you question these invisible contracts, you realize they have no moral foundation. They are not sacred truths. They are survival mechanisms created by individuals who never questioned their own patterns. Some of these contracts were passed down from trauma. Some were born from fear. Some were constructed from insecurity. None of them were built with your well-being in mind. The most dangerous contract of all is the one that convinces you that love means endurance, not mutual effort, not communication, not understanding, but endurance. Endure their criticism, endure their mood swings, endure their emotional demands, endure their lack of boundaries, endure their refusal to acknowledge your growth. And for years, you believed it. You believed that good children endure. You believed that respect means silence. You believed that choosing yourself is selfish. But this was never love. This was conditioning wrapped in the language of affection. As you begin to break these contracts, the emotional landscape shifts. Those who relied on your compliance feel threatened. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or acting cold. But what they are truly reacting to is the loss of control over the version of you that was convenient for them. They are watching the collapse of a silent agreement that kept you small. And the truth is, the moment you stop unconsciously honoring these contracts, you begin to step into a more authentic version of yourself. Recognizing these invisible contracts does not mean blaming your family for everything. It means understanding the system you were raised in so you can choose differently. You begin to realize that you are not obligated to fulfill roles that harm you. You are not required to be the emotional caretaker. You do not need to sacrifice your well-being to maintain connections. You do not need to apologize for refusing to carry responsibilities that were never yours. Once you see the contracts clearly, you understand that the power they held came from your silence, not from their legitimacy. And that is the first real step toward freedom. When you stop honoring agreements you never signed, you reclaim the authority over your own life. This is not rebellion, it is clarity. It is the quiet but undeniable decision to no longer participate in dynamics that drain your spirit. And from here, something new begins to form inside you. Something grounded, confident, and deeply aligned with your true self. The psychology of guilt. How it's weaponized against you. Guilt is one of the most powerful emotional forces in a toxic family system because it operates quietly, subtly, and with incredible precision. It doesn't attack you directly. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. Guilt works by turning your mind against itself, making you question your instincts, your boundaries, and even your right to emotional autonomy. And the most painful part is that this guilt didn't originate from your own moral compass. It was planted, conditioned, cultivated over years until it felt like a natural response. But guilt is not always a sign that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt is simply evidence that you're breaking a cycle that was designed to keep you compliant. You start to notice that the guilt appears exactly when you try to protect yourself. The moment you say no, the moment you take distance, the moment you speak honestly. Immediately, a voice inside you whispers that you're being ungrateful or selfish. But that voice is not the voice of truth. It's an echo of the environment that raised you. A reflection of years spent absorbing the idea that your needs were less important than the emotional comfort of those around you. And now that you're beginning to assert yourself, the conditioning reacts as if you're committing a moral offense. In toxic family systems, guilt becomes a tool of control because it exploits your desire to be good. It manipulates your conscience, your compassion, and your fear of hurting the people you love. You may have heard phrases like, "After everything we've done for you," or "You wouldn't be here without us," or "Family doesn't treat each other this way." These statements are not reminders of love. They are pressure tactics. They are emotional levers designed to make you feel responsible for their feelings while ignoring the impact of their behavior on yours. And because you were trained from a young age to keep the peace, you internalize the idea that discomfort is your fault. But when you examine guilt through the lens of Stoic philosophy, you see it differently. Marcus Aurelius taught that emotions must be questioned, not obeyed. Guilt is not an objective truth. It is a judgment, and judgments can be wrong. Guilt must be evaluated by asking a simple question: am I violating my values, or am I simply violating someone else's expectations? If the guilt arises because you are preserving your peace, protecting your boundaries, or respecting your inner life, then the guilt is misplaced. It is nothing more than a byproduct of growth. Once you see guilt clearly, you start to notice its patterns. Sometimes it shows up as moral guilt. They try to convince you that you are a bad person for choosing yourself. Sometimes it appears as emotional guilt. They act wounded or disappointed to make you retreat back into the old dynamic. And sometimes it appears as identity guilt. They remind you of who you used to be, hoping you'll slip back into the familiar version of yourself that didn't challenge anything. These forms of guilt create confusion, but confusion is not clarity. Confusion is the fog that keeps you from recognizing manipulation. The more you observe guilt, the more you understand that it is not a compass pointing toward what is right. It's a chain keeping you tied to what is familiar. And the familiar is not always healthy. The familiar is often the very reason you feel drained, anxious, or small in the first place. Breaking free from this guilt does not mean you stop caring about your family. It means you stop sacrificing your well-being to maintain an illusion of harmony. It means you stop believing that love must come at the cost of your mental peace. You may notice that when you start releasing guilt, those who relied on your compliance begin to react. They may accuse you of being cold. They may try to remind you of old obligations. They may try to provoke an emotional response to pull you back into the pattern. But this is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. This is exactly what happens when you remove yourself from a role that was never yours to carry. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Their reactions are not proof that your boundary is wrong. Their resistance is simply the system adjusting to your newfound clarity. When guilt no longer controls you, something extraordinary happens. You begin to act from intention instead of fear. You begin to speak honestly without rehearsing every outcome. You begin to choose yourself without apology. And you begin to understand that protecting your peace is not an act of hostility. It is an act of respect for the life you are trying to build. Guilt loses its power the moment you realize you were never meant to carry it. And once it releases its hold, you walk into a version of yourself that feels grounded, aligned, and finally free to live without permission. The Stoic shift, reclaiming ownership of your inner life. There's a moment in your growth when you stop trying to fix the external chaos and start understanding that the real battleground is inside your own mind. For years, you believed that peace depended on keeping everyone around you satisfied. You tried to manage moods, avoid conflict, anticipate reactions, and soften your own needs to maintain stability. You became the emotional regulator of the household, the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who absorbed more than you ever expressed. But something begins to change when you realize you have spent your entire life reacting instead of choosing. And from that realization emerges the Stoic shift, a turning point where you begin to reclaim what always belonged to you, the authority over your inner world. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind is its own citadel, a fortress that no one can breach unless you grant them access. Yet most people raised in toxic family systems never knew they had the right to guard that fortress. You were raised to believe that your thoughts were negotiable, your emotions were open territory, and your sense of self was something that could be adjusted to keep others comfortable. But as you mature, you begin to question this. You start to see that the chaos you absorbed was never a reflection of your identity, only a reflection of the environment that shaped you. And the more you examine this truth, the more you feel the need to reclaim the space inside your mind that was never meant to be communal. The Stoic shift does not come with anger or rebellion. It comes with clarity. You begin to understand the difference between what belongs to you and what belongs to them. Their fears, their judgments, their projections, their expectations, their emotional storms, none of this is your responsibility. You may have spent years believing you had to carry these burdens to prove your devotion, but devotion built on self-abandonment is not devotion, it's conditioning. And once you break the conditioning, you begin to experience a kind of freedom that feels both unfamiliar and powerful. You start noticing how much of your life has been shaped by anticipating negative reactions. You held back your truth because you feared conflict. You adjusted your dreams because they didn't approve. You suppressed your boundaries because you were afraid of disappointing them. These choices weren't made consciously. They were reactions built over years of emotional patterning. But now that you see them, you realize something crucial. Your mind has been living according to rules that do not serve you. And the only person who can rewrite those rules is you. Reclaiming your inner life means giving yourself permission to think without interference. It means allowing your opinions to exist even when they differ from the family narrative. It means letting your emotions rise without immediately asking, how will they react to this? It means understanding that your inner world is not a communal space where everyone gets a say. It is a private sanctuary where only truth, clarity, and intention belong. The moment you recognize this, something in you strengthens. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You stop seeking validation from people who were never capable of providing it in a healthy way. This is where the Stoic practice becomes transformative. Instead of reacting to every emotional disturbance around you, you begin to observe it. You watch their behavior the way a philosopher studies human nature without personalizing it. Their anger is not a reflection of your wrongdoing. Their disappointment is not a moral judgment against you. Their guilt trips are not evidence that you owe them anything. They are simply manifestations of their own internal struggles, and you no longer allow these manifestations to dictate the quality of your inner life. As you reclaim your inner world, you start to build boundaries that are quiet but unbreakable. Boundaries that come not from defensiveness, but from understanding. You don't need to raise your voice or justify yourself endlessly. You simply decide what enters your mental space and what does not. This shift is subtle but powerful. You stop trying to change them. You stop trying to earn approval. You stop trying to rescue people who do not want to be rescued. And for the first time, you feel the weight lifting from your shoulders. What surprises you most is how natural this shift begins to feel. You start to trust yourself more. You start to listen to your own intuition instead of the voices that shaped you. You begin to see your family not as the authority over your identity, but as part of your story, not the authors of it. And with each small step you take back into your own mind, you feel stronger, clearer, and more aligned with the person you were always meant to become. This is the Stoic shift, the reclamation of your inner life. The understanding that peace is not something they give you. Peace is something you build. And once you claim it, no one can take it away. How to set boundaries without starting a war setting. Boundaries in a toxic family system feels like stepping onto a battlefield you never wanted to enter. You've spent years avoiding conflict, softening your voice, minimizing your needs, and adjusting your behavior just to keep the emotional temperature stable. The idea of saying no, expressing discomfort, or asserting your own limits feels dangerous, almost like a betrayal. But the truth is that boundaries are not weapons. Boundaries are definitions. They clarify where you end and where someone else begins. And when they are set with calmness and intention, they can transform your inner life without turning every conversation into a confrontation. The first step is understanding that a boundary is not about controlling anyone. It's about controlling what you allow. A toxic family dynamic often convinces you that setting a boundary is an attack, a challenge to their authority, or a rejection of their love. But this is only because they benefited from the version of you that never questioned anything. When you set a boundary, you are not creating conflict. You are revealing conflict that was already there, hidden beneath years of silence and emotional compromise. So the fear you feel is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you are finally stepping into your own life. One of the biggest mistakes people make is waiting until they are overwhelmed to speak. They bottle everything up until the pressure becomes unbearable, and then the boundary comes out in frustration or desperation. This is understandable, but not necessary. Boundaries set from a place of calm clarity are stronger, cleaner, and far more effective. Marcus Aurelius taught that we must act according to reason, not impulse. So the boundary begins internally, not externally. You decide what is acceptable for you. You decide what violates your peace. You decide what you will allow into your mental space. The decision itself is the boundary. Speaking it aloud is simply the expression of it. You learn quickly that you don't need long explanations. Over-explaining is a habit formed from years of trying to justify your right to exist. But boundaries don't require justification. They require clarity. Statements like, "I'm not available for this conversation right now," or "I won't continue discussions that become disrespectful," are complete sentences. You're not asking for permission. You're stating your standard. And although they may react with resistance, accusation, or emotional pressure, their discomfort does not invalidate your boundary. The secret to setting boundaries without starting a war is emotional neutrality. You do not need to defend, argue, or prove anything. You do not need to raise your voice or match their intensity. You simply hold your position the way a Stoic holds their dignity. Steady, grounded, unshakable. When you refuse to engage in emotional chaos, the chaos loses its power. The toxic dynamic thrives on reactions. When you remove your reactions, the system begins to collapse. This is not about winning. This is about protecting your peace. Another essential principle is consistency. A boundary spoken but not upheld is just a suggestion. Toxic family members will test your boundaries the same way they tested your patience. They want to see if you'll slip back into the old role. But each time you calmly reinforce your standard, you strengthen it. They may become irritated at first. They may accuse you of being distant or cold. They may try guilt or manipulation to break your resolve. But this is not evidence that the boundary is wrong. It is evidence that the boundary is working. What surprises you is that you don't need to distance yourself entirely to protect yourself. Sometimes distance is necessary, but often the simple act of refusing to participate in unhealthy exchanges is enough to shift the dynamic. When you stop feeding the patterns weaken. When you stop accepting disrespect, they are forced to confront their own behavior. And even if they never change, you have changed. You have created a space between their actions and your internal experience. That space is everything. That space is freedom. Setting boundaries without starting a war is not about controlling the family system. It's about controlling how much of that system enters your mind. It's about speaking with firmness instead of fear. It's about allowing yourself to be different from the version of you they expect. And most importantly, it's about refusing to abandon yourself, to maintain a peace that never truly existed. You set boundaries not to punish, but to protect. Not to distance yourself from love, but to distance yourself from harm. And the moment you choose this path, you begin to build a life that reflects your true identity instead of the old scripts that once defined you. When distance is the most loving choice. There comes a moment in your journey when you realize that staying close is no longer an expression of love, but an act of self-abandonment. This realization is painful because it goes against everything you were taught. Family was supposed to be unconditional. Family was supposed to be unity at all costs. But unity that damages your mental health is not unity. It is captivity. And when the environment becomes so emotionally charged, so draining, so corrosive to your well-being that your identity begins to crumble inside it, distance stops being an act of rebellion and becomes an act of self-preservation. The truth is that sometimes the most loving choice, for you and for them, is space. Distance is not cruelty. Distance is clarity. It is the decision to step away from a dynamic that keeps repeating the same cycles, the same arguments, the same emotional entanglements that leave you exhausted and filled with guilt you never earned. When you take distance, you are not saying I don't care about you. You are saying I care about myself enough to stop participating in patterns that are unhealthy for us both. Toxic systems rely on proximity. They rely on access to your emotional energy, your reactions, and your empathy. Distance interrupts the cycle. It breaks the rhythm. It creates room for silence to do what confrontation never could. Many people misunderstand distance as abandonment, but abandonment is leaving someone without explanation or intention. Distance, when done with awareness, is the opposite. It is choosing a space where respect has room to grow again. When you are constantly triggered, constantly pressured, constantly walking on emotional glass, you cannot love clearly. Your heart becomes defensive, your voice becomes suppressed, and your mind becomes heavy. Space allows the emotional fog to lift. It allows you to breathe without anticipating the next conflict. It allows you to remember who you are outside of the family narrative that shaped you. The Stoics understood the importance of stepping back to regain perspective. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to withdraw into his inner citadel, the place inside where clarity is born. Distance in a toxic family operates the same way. It is not running away. It is stepping back so you can see the truth without distortion. Toxic dynamics twist your perception. They convince you that your needs are unreasonable, your feelings are exaggerated, your boundaries are disrespectful. When you create space, your perception resets. You see the situation not through the lens of survival, but through the lens of truth. You may fear that distance means the end of the relationship, but in many cases, distance is the only thing that keeps the relationship from collapsing entirely. When you are too close to a fire, you burn. When you step back, you can actually see the flames. And once you see them, you can decide whether there is a way to interact without being consumed. Some relationships improve with space because the tension that fueled the dysfunction begins to dissolve. Others remain toxic no matter how much distance you give. But either way, space gives you a chance to make choices from a place of strength rather than obligation. What may surprise you is that the guilt you feel when taking distance is not proof that the decision is wrong. It is proof that you were conditioned to ignore your own limits. You were raised to believe that closeness must be maintained even at the cost of your emotional health. But closeness without respect is not closeness. It is emotional entanglement. It is dependence masquerading as love. You are not betraying anyone by stepping back. You are honoring the truth that your peace matters. And when your peace matters, your interactions become healthier, cleaner, and more intentional. Distance also exposes intentions. When someone cares about you, they respect the space you need. They may not understand it immediately, but they do not punish you for it. They do not attack you, guilt you, or try to break your boundaries. They may ask questions, they may feel confused, but they do not attempt to pull you back into the old role. On the other hand, those who relied on your compliance will often react with frustration, accusation, or manipulation. They are not upset because you hurt them. They are upset because they lost access to your emotional labor, and this distinction is crucial. As you take distance, you begin to realize that you are not responsible for the growth other people refuse to pursue. You cannot fix wounds that were never yours. You cannot heal people who resist healing. You cannot save anyone at the expense of your own sanity. Distance allows you to focus on your own growth, your own values, your own identity. It allows you to become someone you can respect. And from that place, you can decide calmly, logically, without guilt, how close or far you need to be. Distance is not the breakdown of love. It is the boundary that allows love to evolve into something healthier. And if the relationship cannot survive distance, then it was being held together by your self-sacrifice, not genuine connection. When you understand this, the fear begins to dissolve. You step into a new chapter where your well-being is not negotiable, and your life is no longer dictated by patterns that kept you small. Rebuilding your identity. Without family expectations. There is a moment, after the guilt subsides and the noise quiets, when you begin to realize that you don't actually know who you are without the expectations of your family. This realization can be disorienting. All your life, you were measured through their lens. You learned what to fear based on what they feared. You learned what to chase based on what they approved. You learned what to suppress based on what they ridiculed. Your dreams, your personality, your reactions, even your silence were shaped inside a structure that demanded compliance and emotional predictability. And when you finally step out of that structure, you feel something unfamiliar: spaciousness, the open air of your own identity. The Stoics believed that the most important task of any human being is to understand themselves, to examine their thoughts, to question their impulses, to observe their patterns, and to separate what belongs to them from what was imposed upon them. When you grow up in a toxic or emotionally heavy family system, this self-examination becomes essential because so much of what you believe about yourself was never truly yours. Rebuilding your identity means reclaiming the pieces of you that were silenced, dismissed, or overshadowed. It means asking questions that you were never encouraged to ask. What do I actually value? What do I find meaningful? What kind of life feels true to me? These questions are not simple because for the first time, the answers do not need to align with anyone else's expectations. You begin to notice that much of your personality was shaped as a survival mechanism. Maybe you became the people pleaser because it kept the peace. Maybe you became the overachiever because it earned approval. Maybe you became the quiet one because speaking up led to conflict. These traits feel like identity, but they are adaptations. They served a purpose once, but now they limit you. As you grow, you realize that you cannot build a new life with an identity rooted in fear and accommodation. You need a foundation built on authenticity rather than reaction. Rebuilding your identity is not about detaching from your past. It's about understanding it so you can grow beyond it. You start by observing the moments when your old programming shows up. You notice when you apologize, even though you did nothing wrong. You notice when you shrink your opinions because you fear judgment. You notice when you take responsibility for someone else's emotions. These habits reveal where the old identity is still trying to survive. And each time you catch yourself, you make a different choice. You begin to assert your preferences. You begin to speak honestly. You begin to allow yourself to take up space. These small shifts accumulate, slowly constructing a new version of yourself that feels rooted in truth. One of the most powerful steps in this rebuilding process is separating who you are from who you were expected to be. Expectations are powerful because they are often presented as love. But love that demands your conformity is not love. It is possession. You are not here to live a life scripted by someone else's fears, limitations, or unresolved trauma. You are not here to fulfill the dreams they never pursued. You are not here to shrink so others feel comfortable. When you let go of their expectations, you experience a profound liberation. It feels like breathing fully for the first time in years. You begin to explore your interests, not as obligations, but as choices. You discover what brings you peace, what energizes you, what challenges you in a meaningful way. You begin to define success on your own terms, not based on comparisons, not based on approval, not based on the roles assigned to you. And as you step into this process, you start to recognize the difference between the voice of your conditioning and the voice of your intuition. Conditioning speaks in fear. Intuition speaks in clarity. The most surprising part of rebuilding your identity is how quiet the process can be. It doesn't require grand declarations or dramatic transformations. It happens in the daily decisions where you choose authenticity over compliance. It happens when you stop explaining yourself excessively. It happens when you stop seeking validation from people who never saw you clearly in the first place. It happens when you allow yourself to pursue a life that feels like your own. In this reconstruction, you begin to feel a sense of self-respect that is stronger than external approval. You begin to trust your own judgment. You begin to feel grounded in who you are becoming. And slowly, the version of yourself that once lived for the expectations of others fades, replaced by someone who thinks independently, feels deeply, and acts with intention. This is the identity you build when you no longer carry the weight of their expectations. It is an identity rooted in truth, guided by clarity and strengthened by every boundary you set along the way. The peace after the storm. What life looks like with boundaries. There is a point in the journey when the chaos begins to fade, and for the first time in your life, you feel something unfamiliar, quiet. Not the quiet of suppression, not the quiet of walking on emotional eggshells, not the quiet of swallowing your truth to keep the peace. This is a different quiet. This is the quiet that comes when your inner world is no longer dictated by external storms. It is the quiet of emotional ownership, the quiet of clarity, the quiet of a life that is finally beginning to align with the person you were always meant to be. This peace is subtle at first. You notice it in small pockets of your day, in the ease with which you breathe, in the absence of dread when your phone lights up, in the way your shoulders relax when you're alone. And you realize something profound. Boundaries did not destroy your life. They rebuilt it. One of the first things you notice is the mental space you gain. Without the constant pressure to anticipate reactions, manage emotions, or avoid conflict, your mind has room to think clearly. For years, your thoughts revolved around others. What will they say? How will they respond? What do they expect? But when you set boundaries, that loop breaks. You are no longer trapped in the mental rehearsal of other people's feelings. Your thoughts begin to revolve around your own goals, your own values, your own needs. This shift is not selfish. It is healing. It is the first time your internal life belongs entirely to you. You also notice how your emotional body begins to calm. The anxiety that once felt like a constant companion begins to loosen its grip. The guilt that used to rise every time you asserted yourself becomes quieter, weaker, less convincing. You start to understand that guilt is not a compass pointing toward what is right, but a remnant of old conditioning. And as the conditioning dissolves, you experience something even deeper, emotional neutrality. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop collapsing. You stop internalizing everything. You stop making their reactions the measure of your worth. Relationships also change, sometimes in ways you never expected. The people who genuinely care about you adjust to the new dynamic. They respect your limits. They listen when you speak. They may not understand everything immediately, but they honor your growth. These relationships become stronger because they are no longer built on silent resentment or hidden fear. They are built on clarity, on honesty, on mutual respect. But the relationships that depended on your compliance begin to crumble. They weaken not because you failed, but because they were never built on healthy foundations. Boundaries reveal truth. They show you who is capable of loving you in a way that does not harm you. As the dust settles, you also begin to rediscover yourself. You find interests you had buried. You explore ideas you had ignored. You allow yourself to dream in ways you never permitted before. Without the weight of old expectations, your identity becomes fluid and expansive. You start to see opportunities where you once saw obstacles. You start to trust your choices without needing approval. And you start to feel a sense of self-worth that is stable, not dependent on how well you perform the role assigned to you. What surprises most people is that the peace after the storm is not dramatic. It's gentle. It enters your life quietly, the same way truth entered your awareness. This peace is not loud. It does not demand attention. It does not need validation. It exists simply because you have reclaimed the authority over your inner life. You no longer live in reaction to others. You no longer carry emotional burdens that were not yours. You no longer abandon yourself to protect relationships that were draining you. And as a result, your days become lighter, more intentional, and more aligned with who you truly are. The Stoics believed that tranquility comes not from the absence of problems, but from the mastery of your inner world. You now understand this firsthand. Problems still exist, people still behave unpredictably, life still throws challenges your way. But the difference is that you face all of it from a grounded center. You respond instead of react. You think instead of panic. You observe instead of absorb, and this shift in your internal state becomes the foundation for a new kind of life, one where your energy flows toward things that nourish you instead of things that drain you. The peace after the storm is not something you find. It is something you build, and once you experience it, you begin to understand why boundaries were never an act of rebellion. They were an act of profound self-respect. They were the necessary step toward a life where your well-being is not constantly sacrificed for the comfort of others. In this new life, your soul finally has room to breathe, and your mind has room to grow. And from here, you are not surviving. You are rising. Final philosophical reflection. You are not here to carry their pain. Finally, there comes a point in this journey where you stand face to face with a truth that feels both liberating and uncomfortable. You begin to understand that you were never meant to be the keeper of other people's unresolved wounds. You were not born to absorb the fears they never confronted, the anger they never processed, the expectations they never questioned. Yet for years, you carried all of it as if it were your responsibility. You shaped yourself around their emotional storms. You learned to quiet your voice, to protect their comfort. You convinced yourself that love meant endurance, even when endurance was draining the life out of you. But as your awareness grows, something profound becomes clear. You are not here to inherit their pain. You are here to transform your own life. This realization is not easy. It requires stripping away layers of conditioning that told you your worth depends on how well you carry others. It requires challenging the belief that family suffering must become your suffering. You begin to see the distinction between compassion and self-sacrifice, between loyalty and self-betrayal, between responsibility and emotional captivity. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote that each of us is responsible for our own mind, our own judgments, our own actions. What others carry is theirs. What you carry is yours. And the moment you internalize this truth, your entire relationship with the world begins to shift. You start to observe your family's behavior without absorbing it. You see their reactions, their fears, their attempts to pull you back into familiar roles, and you recognize that their struggle is a reflection of their own inner world. It is not a reflection of your character. Their emotional turbulence is not a sign that you failed. It is a sign that you stopped playing the part that kept their dynamic intact. And for the first time, instead of collapsing under their expectations, you stand in your own clarity. You stand in your own responsibility. You stand in your own truth. As you embrace this understanding, a different kind of strength emerges, one that is rooted not in defiance, but in alignment. You begin to act according to your values instead of their demands. You begin to speak according to your truth instead of their comfort. You begin to make choices based on what nourishes your soul instead of what protects their patterns. This shift feels unfamiliar at first, almost like walking on new legs, but with each step, the ground beneath you becomes more solid. You start to recognize that your life is not a continuation of their story. It is the beginning of your own. The most powerful transformation happens internally. You stop seeking permission to grow. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop shrinking to fit into a version of yourself that no longer exists. You realize that your path requires courage, not compliance. It requires consciousness, not guilt. It requires truth, not emotional debt. And as you walk forward, something within you settles. You feel a sense of quiet authority rising in your chest, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and what you will no longer carry. You also begin to understand that healing does not require bitterness. You do not need to hate them to free yourself. You do not need to erase them from your heart to reclaim your life. You simply need to stop surrendering your peace to dynamics that were never yours to fix. You can love them from a distance. You can care without collapsing. You can remain kind without being compliant. And you can remain present without being consumed. This is what mature, grounded, intentional love looks like. It is steady, it is clear, it is boundaried. In the end, the greatest gift you give yourself is permission to be whole. Not the version of you molded by survival, not the version shaped by guilt, but the version that stands rooted in truth. You are no longer driven by fear of disappointing others. You are no longer controlled by the emotional weather of your family. You are no longer defined by roles you never chose. You step into the life that belongs to you, a life guided by integrity, inner peace, and self-respect. This is the moment when the past loses its power, not because you forget it, but because you finally understand it. You see clearly where the patterns came from, why they shaped you, and why they no longer belong in the life you are building. You breathe differently. You think differently. You love differently. And above all, you carry yourself differently. Not as a keeper of their pain, but as the guardian of your own inner world. A closing liberation. The life you build when you stop carrying what was never yours. There comes a point at the end of this journey when you look back at everything you faced. The guilt, the invisible contracts, the conditioning, the emotional storms, the hesitation, the fear of disappointing people you were raised to honor, and you realize something extraordinary. You survived all of it, not by becoming harder, not by becoming colder, but by becoming clearer. You did not escape your family. You escaped the version of yourself that was created to keep the peace in a system that never offered you peace in return. And now, standing here, with a mind awakened and a heart grounded, you finally understand the meaning of true inner freedom. This freedom is not dramatic. It does not roar like rebellion. It does not announce itself loudly. It arrives the same way awareness first arrived, quietly. You notice it in the ease with which you speak your truth, in the way your breathing steadies instead of tightening, in the way your thoughts no longer revolve around pleasing others or predicting their reactions. You begin to move through life not as someone who must earn their right to exist, but as someone who knows that existence itself is enough. You stop asking for permission to be yourself. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop shrinking to fit the expectations of people who never understood the weight you carried. You begin to see your past with a sense of compassion rather than shame. You understand that the younger version of you did the best they could with the tools they had. They survived by adapting. They survived by reading the emotional atmosphere of the household. They survived by becoming the peacemaker, the caretaker, the responsible one, the silent one. But survival is not the same as living. And now you are ready to live, not in reaction to pain, but in alignment with truth. The family patterns that once felt like destiny now feel like history, important to understand, but no longer a script you're compelled to follow. You see clearly that you can love people without absorbing their chaos. You can understand someone without excusing their harm. You can care without surrendering the stability of your inner world. You realize that you don't need to argue with anyone about your growth. You don't need to convince anyone that your boundaries are valid. You don't need to justify the peace you choose. Peace justifies itself. You also begin to see a deeper truth. Growth often threatens those who are unwilling to grow, not because your improvement harms them, but because it exposes their stagnation. And you no longer take that personally. Their discomfort is not your failure. Their reaction is not your responsibility. Their inability to understand your evolution does not diminish the necessity of that evolution. When you step out of the role they once assigned to you, you give them the invitation, though not the obligation, to step out of their own patterns too. What emerges next is a new kind of strength, not the strength of endurance, not the strength of carrying emotional weight, but the strength of alignment. You act from intention rather than fear. You speak from clarity rather than insecurity. You choose from consciousness rather than conditioning. And each time you honor your truth, you reinforce a foundation inside yourself that cannot be shaken by guilt, manipulation, or old narratives. You realize that the greatest boundary you ever set was not spoken. It was internal. It was the moment you decided that your life belongs to you. It was the moment you stopped carrying pain that was never yours. It was the moment you understood that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is sacred. It is the cornerstone of every healthy relationship you will ever build, including the relationship you have with yourself. As this chapter closes, you stand not as someone who escaped their family, but as someone who reclaimed their identity. You stand as someone who learned to separate compassion from self-sacrifice. You stand as someone who understands that love without boundaries is not love. It is attachment. It is fear. It is the erosion of the self. But love with boundaries becomes something powerful, clean, and enduring. It becomes a choice rather than an obligation. Your future is no longer dictated by inherited roles. Your inner life is no longer accessible to anyone who storms through without permission. Your peace is no longer negotiable, and your path is no longer overshadowed by expectations that were never meant for you. You walk forward now with clarity in your mind, strength in your chest, and a sense of grounding that cannot be taken from you. Not by guilt, not by fear, not by the past. This is your life, your mind, your truth. And for the first time, you carry only what belongs to you.